This is the brief on the Philippines Electronic Commerce Act of 2000. Signed in June 2000, Republic Act No. 8792 is the foundational law that dragged Philippine commerce into the digital age by making online transactions legally valid. See, before we could shop or sign contracts online, the law actually had to recognize that pixels on a screen were just as real as ink on paper. First up, legal equivalency. Electronic documents, data messages, and e-signatures carry the exact same legal weight as traditional paper documents. It's kind of like a digital magic trick. Suddenly, a PDF with an electronic mark becomes just as legally binding as a sworn, physically signed letter. Now that digital files had real legal power, the biggest entity in the country had to actually start using them. Second, mandatory government modernization. Agencies got a strict 2-year deadline to go digital. They had to accept electronic documents, issue e-permits, take digital payments, and set up an online network called RP Web. Can you imagine the scramble of forcing an entire government bureaucracy to pivot to digital in just 24 months back in 2000? But moving everyone online creates massive new vulnerabilities, which brings us to the dark side of digital commerce. Finally, cracking down on cybercrime. The act outright criminalized hacking, virus distribution, and digital piracy. We're talking mandatory imprisonment of 6 months to 3 years, plus a minimum 100,000 peso fine. It also protected service providers from liability if they were just unknowingly transmitting data. Think of it as putting heavy, legally enforced deadbolts on the new digital doors we just opened. So, the Electronic Commerce Act essentially wrote the rule book for the modern Philippine digital economy, proving that a law from 2000 still governs how we click, sign, and pay today.
Welcome to this video on the architecture of digital trust, decoding the Philippine Electronic Commerce Act, or RA 8792. This foundational law translates data into legally binding reality for both domestic and international commerce. The state's mandate aims to build a globally connected digital economy. This involves the private sector engine, recognizing the private sector's role in building ICT infrastructure. It also includes the state's infrastructure obligation to secure, connect, and develop the national information infrastructure. Within a digital transaction, we define 3 key actors: the originator, who creates and sends the electronic document; the addressee, the intended recipient; and the intermediary and service provider, the technical conduit, who cannot modify the document unless specifically authorized. Information cannot be denied legal validity solely because it is electronic. The equivalence matrix demonstrates that digital documents satisfy both the in-writing and original document requirements by ensuring integrity, reliability, and proper authentication. A legally binding electronic signature rests on 4 pillars: identity and access, reliability, necessity, and verifiability. Note that the prescribed procedure for the signature must be unalterable by the interested parties. Electronic documents command the evidential weight of, quote, best evidence under the best evidence rule. The burden of proof lies with the person introducing the document to prove authenticity. The presumption of integrity presumes the information system is legally sound, provided it was operating normally. Contracts formed entirely via data messages are fully enforceable, as an offer and acceptance can be proven electronically. Welcome to this video on the architecture of digital trust, decoding the Philippine Electronic Commerce Act, or RA 8792. This foundational law translates data into legally binding reality for both domestic and international commerce. The state's mandate aims to build a globally connected digital economy. This involves the private sector engine, recognizing the private sector's role in building ICT infrastructure. It also includes the state's infrastructure obligation to secure, connect, and develop the national information infrastructure. Within a digital transaction, we define 3 key actors: the originator, who creates and sends the electronic document; the addressee, the intended recipient; and the intermediary and service provider, the technical conduit, who cannot modify the document unless specifically authorized. Information cannot be denied legal validity solely because it is electronic. The equivalence matrix demonstrates that digital documents satisfy both the in-writing and original document requirements by ensuring integrity, reliability, and proper authentication. A legally binding electronic signature rests on 4 pillars: identity and access, reliability, necessity, and verifiability. Note that the prescribed procedure for the signature must be unalterable by the interested parties. Electronic documents command the evidential weight of, quote, best evidence under the best evidence rule. The burden of proof lies with the person introducing the document to prove authenticity. The presumption of integrity presumes the information system is legally sound, provided it was operating normally. Contracts formed entirely via data messages are fully enforceable, as an offer and acceptance can be proven electronically. For banking, the consummation rule states transactions are legally complete the moment cash is dispensed or an account is debited or credited. Defining the physical boundaries of a borderless transaction involves time dynamics and space dynamics. Dispatch occurs when a message leaves the originator's control. Receipt occurs when it enters a designated system or is retrieved. The Tacitus rule legally defines dispatch and receipt based on the place of business. Modernizing logistics requires strict document termination protocols. Digital logistics capabilities include declaring goods value and authorizing release. The reversion caveat requires the electronic document to be formally terminated and replaced with a paper document explicitly stating this termination if rights must revert to physical form. The 2-year mandate aims to digitize the Philippine public sector through the RPWEB framework. This includes accepting electronic filings, issuing digital documents, and processing payments using digital methods and electronic receipts. The service provider safe harbor establishes conditional immunity for ISPs. An ISP is shielded from liability regarding transmitted material if they meet 3 criteria: no actual knowledge, no financial benefit, and no inducement. Lawful access demands strict electronic key confidentiality. This involves exclusive access for authorized individuals and the definition of the electronic key as a secret code. The obligation of confidentiality strictly prohibits sharing the key with unauthorized persons. Trust is enforced through severe mandatory statutory penalties. Violations such as general breaches, piracy, and hacking or cracking carry significant fines and mandatory imprisonment terms. Institutional orchestration involves the DTI, DBM, BSP, and the Congressional Oversight Committee. Section 39 details the rule of international reciprocity, where statutory advantages are granted to foreign parties only if their home country grants identical benefits to Filipino citizens. Republic Act No. 8792 is the immutable foundation of the Philippine digital economy. It established functional equivalence, protected commerce through safe harbor provisions and mandatory penalties, and created an enduring framework of trust connecting public and private sectors to the global information age.
Have you ever paused for a second and wondered if that I agree button you just clicked has any real, legal power? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the law that pretty much governs every single click, tap, and online purchase you make in the Philippines. It's the Electronic Commerce Act, and we're about to find out why your digital life counts big time. Okay, so let's just get right to it with a question. Think about the last time you signed up for a service, bought something online, or even just downloaded a new app. You saw that wall of text and you clicked, I agree. So is that little click, your digital signature, actually legal? Well, the short answer is a huge yes. And the reason for that is a piece of law that was honestly way ahead of its time. Republic Act 8792, better known as the Electronic Commerce Act. So let's talk about the digital handshake this law basically created. I mean, you gotta remember, this was passed way back in the year 2000. For a lot of people, dial-up internet was still a thing. The idea of doing all your business online was still kind of new and futuristic. So this act was a huge deal. It built a legal bridge between the old world of paper and ink and the brand new frontier of clicks and code. The main idea behind it was actually pretty simple, but totally revolutionary. Its one big goal was to make a digital signature just as legally binding as one you write with a pen. It was all about building trust, creating legal certainty, and really pushing both businesses and the government to dive headfirst into the digital age. All right, so to really get how powerful this law is, we kind of have to learn to speak its language. So let's break down some of the most important words in its vocabulary. First up, you have the electronic document. Now, this isn't just any old file on your computer. Think of it as any piece of digital info that proves something important or gives you a specific right. It's like the digital version of your diploma or your car's registration papers or that huge contract you just signed. It's the what of any online transaction. Next, we've got the electronic signature. And no, we're not just talking about a scanned image of your handwritten signature. This is way broader. It's any unique digital mark you use to say, yep, I approve this. It could be the fingerprint you use on your phone, a special PIN code, or even just checking that little I agree box. It's the who and the why. It proves it was you and that you meant it. And finally, you have the electronic data message. You can think of this as the digital envelope, the container that carries everything else. It's the information that's being sent, received, or stored online. So an email, a text message, a transaction record, these are all data messages that are carrying our documents and signatures across the internet. Okay, now we're getting to the real heart of it all. This is the single most important idea in the whole law, the principle of legal equivalence. This is the magic formula that makes pixels on a screen just as powerful as paperwork in a filing cabinet. The law itself says it perfectly. This one sentence from Section 7 is the absolute game changer. It declares that electronic documents shall have the legal effect, validity, or enforceability as any other document. This right here is the core of the whole act. It levels the playing field between the physical world and the digital one. So what does that actually mean for you and me? It means that a handwritten signature has the exact same legal weight as your digital one. An original document doesn't have to be a physical piece of paper anymore. It can be a verifiable electronic file. The law basically created a digital twin for our most important legal concepts. But, and this is a really, really important but, it's not quite that simple. Not every single email or PDF you have is automatically legally binding. For these digital documents to be considered valid, they have to pass a few crucial tests. So for an electronic document to hold up in court, it has to prove three things. First, integrity. Can you prove it's the original, completely unaltered version? Second, reliability. Was it created and stored using a trustworthy and secure system? And third, authenticity. Can you actually prove it is what you claim it is? Only when it passes these three tests does it get full legal recognition. So, we've talked a lot about the theory. Now let's get practical and look at e-commerce in action. Let's see where this law actually shows up in our day-to-day lives. Honestly, this law is everywhere. You click accept on the terms and conditions for a new app? Yep, that's the e-commerce act at work. You file your taxes or pay a government fee online. That's the act too. Managing shipping, doing your online banking, all of it is built on the legal foundation of this one law. And get this, it wasn't just for private businesses. The act actually gave all government agencies a hard 2-year deadline to start accepting and issuing electronic documents. I mean, can you imagine the challenge back then? It was basically a direct order to modernize the entire Philippine government. Now, of course, whenever you have new technology, you're going to have new ways for people to commit crimes. The lawmakers knew this, so they made sure to build in some pretty serious penalties to give this act some real teeth. Let's just look at the specifics for a second. For major offenses like hacking into a system or digital piracy, the consequences are no joke. We're talking a minimum fine of 100,000 pesos, plus mandatory jail time of 6 months to 3 years. And the fines can climb even higher from there. For other violations of the act, the penalties can go all the way up to a staggering 1 million pesos. The message here is loud and clear. Digital crimes come with very, very real-world consequences. So when you put it all together, what's the big takeaway here? Well, the Electronic Commerce Act isn't just a rulebook. It's the actual legal foundation for the modern digital Philippines we live in today. It's what built the trust and the framework that our entire digital economy needed to grow. And this vision was bigger than just online shopping. Right from the very beginning, the law stated that ICT is vital for nation building. This wasn't just about convenience. It was a vision of the internet as a powerful tool for national progress and development. Which brings us to one final really interesting question to think about. This foundational law, the one we've been talking about, was written in the year 2000. That was a world before smartphones were in every pocket, before social media took over our lives, and long before we were even talking about things like AI, blockchain, and crypto. So in the super connected world we live in now, what's next for digital law?
So, I want you to picture this. The year is 2000.
Oh, Y2K era, right.
Exactly, Y2K. And, back then, if someone drove a truck up to your warehouse, broke the padlock, and just stole a whole pallet of physical merchandise, the legal system knew exactly what to do with them.
Yeah, I mean, we've had thousands of years of human history dealing with physical theft.
Right. We have all this precedent defining physical property and physical contracts. The law completely understood atoms.
Atoms, yes. The physical world.
But imagine trying to explain to a judge in the year 2000 that someone broke into a server you don't physically own.
A server located in a country you've never even visited.
Yes. And they copied like a million lines of invisible code without actually deleting the original files.
So technically no physical property is missing.
Exactly. You still have your data. They just have it too. So how do you punish a crime with no physical crime scene?
Or enforce a contract that was signed without a single drop of ink. It's a huge problem.
It really is. And so today we are doing a deep dive into the exact moment a nation decided to make that invisible world visible.
And more importantly, enforceable under the law.
Right. So what exactly is the source material we're digging into today?
Well, we are diving into a truly foundational document from, honestly, a fascinating pivot point in history. Our source material for this deep dive is Republic Act None 8792.
Also known as the Electronic Commerce Act, right?
You got it. Passed in the Philippines on June 14th, 2000.
Wow, so right at the dawn of the new millennium.
Exactly. And the mission here is to completely deconstruct this legal blueprint. We're going to examine the philosophical debates, the technological hurdles, and really just the sheer audacity required for a government to translate abstract digital concepts into binding legal reality.
Concepts like emails or encrypted keys and virtual shopping carts.
Yeah, automated bots, all of that. We'll explore how lawmakers attempted to future-proof an entire economy against technology that frankly hadn't even been invented yet.
Which is just wild to think about. And they also had to establish severe consequences for those who decided to break these new virtual rules, right?
They absolutely did. And, for you listening, every single time you click a button that says, I accept these terms, or you buy something online, you're relying on this invisible legal architecture.
Right, like every time you authorize a digital payment with your thumbprint.
Exactly. It is the absolute bedrock of the modern digital economy.
Reading this act, honestly, it feels like unrolling the architectural blueprints for a sprawling, hyper-futuristic digital city. And we're looking at it before the very first virtual brick was even laid.
That's a great way to put it.
We get to see the logic behind, like where they routed the digital highways and how they conceptualized property rights in a space with literally no physical dimension.
Right, and how they built the jail cells for a totally new breed of criminals.
But before you can enforce the law in a digital metropolis, you really have to define the physics of that reality first.
You do. And the challenge facing lawmakers back then was just profound, because they were dealing with a vocabulary that was rapidly evolving.
So where does the act even start with that?
Well, Section 2 of this act doesn't just jump into definitions. It actually establishes this grand philosophical posture first.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
It explicitly outlines the state's policy to recognize the vital role of information and communications technology, ICT, in nation building.
Nation building. Wow, that's strong language for 2000.
It really is.
Yeah.
They were not treating the internet as just, a glorified fax machine or some fleeting novelty. They recognize it as the fundamental infrastructure of the 21st century.
Right.
The law mandates the creation of, quote, information-friendly environment, unquote.
Which sounds a bit like political rhetoric at first glance.
It does, but it carried massive economic implications, especially regarding who was actually going to build this environment.
Right, because the text reveals this very deliberate division of labor. The state basically admits, hey, we cannot keep pace with the speed of technological innovation.
Yeah, government bureaucracy moves slow. Tech moves fast.
Exactly. So they place the primary responsibility for infrastructure investment and service provision squarely on the private sector's shoulders.
And that strategic retreat by the government was crucial. By relying on private enterprise for the physical infrastructure, they avoided creating this sluggish, state-run monopoly on digital access.
So what did the government actually focus on then, if not the cables and servers?
Their role pivoted entirely to education and capacity building. The policy highlights this urgent need to develop a labor force skilled in ICT.
That makes sense. I mean, a sophisticated digital infrastructure is completely useless if the citizens don't possess the digital literacy to navigate it.
Spot on. So the government committed to facilitating technology transfer, ensuring network security, and promoting what they termed the neutrality of technology.
Okay, that phrase, neutrality of technology, that really stands out to me, especially for a document drafted in 2000.
Why is that?
Well, because it shows they were already anticipating the danger of locking a national economy into one specific proprietary ecosystem or one hardware manufacturer.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They wanted a legal framework that governed the transmission of information, period.
Right, regardless of whether that information was flowing through a copper wire or a fiber optic cable or even a satellite dish.
Which brings us directly into the massive challenge of legal definitions in Section 5.
Oh man, Section 5, this is where it gets really interesting.
Because think about it. If you write a law regulating computers in 2000, and you base your definition on, like, a beige desktop box with a floppy disk drive.
Your legislation is basically obsolete before the ink even dries.
Precisely. And the drafting strategy here is just a masterclass in future-proofing.
How so? What does Section 5 actually say?
So Section 5, Paragraph A, refuses to define a computer by its physical components. Instead, it defines it entirely by its function.
Okay.
The text describes a computer as any device or apparatus, singly or interconnected, which by electronic, electromechanical, optical, or magnetic impulse can process or store information.
Wait, let me process that. So, any device that uses an electronic or optical impulse to receive, record, transmit, store, or process data.
Yep. They realize that hardware is temporary, but data manipulation is eternal.
I am looking at that expansive list of functions, and the implications are just staggering.
They really are.
Because if a computer is defined simply by the invisible physics of data manipulation, then the scope of this law reaches way beyond the desktop PC.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, under this definition, a modern smart refrigerator that tracks its internal temperature and transmits that data over Wi-Fi, that is legally a computer.
Yes, it is.
A digital watch measuring your heart rate, that's a computer. A smart toaster connected to a home network falls under this jurisdiction.
Your interpretation is completely accurate. And, it really underscores the genius of focusing on the functional mechanism rather than the physical form factor.
It's just so broad, but in a good way.
Exactly. Because if your smart refrigerator automatically orders milk from an online grocery store because you programmed it to, it is processing an electronic data message to execute a commercial transaction.
So it has to be governed by the Electronic Commerce Act.
Right. Lawmakers didn't care if the impulse was generated by a high-end server or a tiny microchip embedded in a household appliance.
The functional definition ensures the law scales effortlessly. It covers the Internet of Things, wearable technology, mobile phones, stuff they couldn't even dream of.
Exactly. It anchors the law in the fundamental behavior of electrons rather than the plastic casings we build around them.
That's fascinating. But, moving those electrons around in the year 2000 was a highly anxious endeavor for a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. Public trust was practically zero.
Right. E-commerce required people to type their actual credit card numbers into a web browser, and trust in the security of the open internet was incredibly low.
Which is why the law had to address the vulnerability of data in transit.
How did they manage that?
Well, Section 5, Paragraph F provides the legal recognition of cryptography by defining an electronic key.
Okay, an electronic key. What does that actually mean in the context of the law?
It describes a secret code that secures sensitive information crossing over public channels. It transforms it into a form decipherable only by a matching key.
So by baking this definition into the foundation of the Act, the state is formally acknowledging that public networks are inherently insecure environments.
Exactly. It provided a legal shield for the cryptographic tools necessary to defend data from interception.
Basically saying, hey, securing your digital property with mathematical encryption is legally recognized and protected here.
Right. But, once the data is encrypted and moving across these networks, the law also has to identify the human beings responsible for the transmission.
Right, because in a physical transaction, it's easy. You have a buyer handing cash directly to a seller. It's a direct exchange.
But in the digital matrix, a message might bounce through a dozen different servers before reaching its destination.
So how do they figure out who is who?
The Act establishes this crucial legal triangle: the originator, the addressee, and the intermediary.
Okay, so breaking that down, identifying the responsible parties is basically the prerequisite for establishing liability, right?
Exactly. The originator is the person by whom or on whose behalf the electronic document purports to have been created or sent.
Makes sense. And the addressee.
The addressee is simply the person intended by the originator to receive that message. But the most vital inclusion for the entire architecture of the internet is the intermediary.
The intermediary. So who are they in this scenario?
This is any person who, on behalf of another, sends, receives, or stores that message, or provides other related services.
Okay, so this separates the content creators from the digital postal workers, basically.
Exactly like postal workers.
So your email provider or the company laying the fiber optic cables, the server farm hosting the website, they are just passing the envelopes.
Right. The law explicitly carves them out from the definition of an originator. They're not creating the message, they're merely the conduit.
And that distinction prevents the entire communications infrastructure from just collapsing under the weight of legal liability.
Absolutely. Because think about it. If a telecom company were treated as the originator of every single malicious email or fraudulent contract sent over their network.
The risk of doing business would be astronomical. They'd all go bankrupt.
Exactly. Segregating the intermediary establishes a protective boundary. It allows the physical network to grow completely independently of the content flowing through it.
Okay, so we have this functional vocabulary established now. We know what a computer is. We know how data is secured with keys, and we know who the players are.
Right.
But words and definitions are just concepts. Yeah. The monumental hurdle lawmakers faced was transforming those abstract digital concepts into a binding reality that could survive the scrutiny of an actual courtroom.
And that is the crux of the whole issue.
Because up until this point in legal history, the validity of a contract was intrinsically tied to physical atoms. You needed paper.
You needed the friction of a pen.
You needed ink drying on a page. How does a legal system rip the concept of a contract away from the physical world and apply it to a sequence of ones and zeros?
This represents the most profound paradigm shift in the entire legislation. Chapter 2 of the Act executes this maneuver.
Okay, let's open the hood on Chapter 2.
Sections 6 and 7 mandate the absolute legal equivalence between physical documents and digital data.
Absolute equivalence. Wow.
Section 6 lays down the hammer, really. It says information shall not be denied validity, enforceability, or legal effect solely on the ground that it is in the form of an electronic data message.
So a judge can no longer dismiss an agreement simply because it arrived via email rather than certified mail.
Precisely. It strips away the medium to protect the message itself.
And then Section 7 takes that principle and applies it to evidentiary rules.
Yeah. It dictates that electronic documents possess the exact same legal effect as any other document or legal writing.
But asserting that an electronic document is equivalent to paper immediately runs into a massive philosophical wall.
And a technological wall, too. The concept of the original.
Yes, because in the physical world, the original document is the specific arrangement of wood pulp that the ink physically touched. Everything else is just a photocopy.
A secondary representation, yeah.
But digital files do not operate like physical objects. They operate like ideas. If I drag a file from my hard drive to a USB stick, I am not moving an object.
You are perfectly cloning the arrangement of data, flawlessly.
So how does Section 10 define an original when digital cloning is flawless and infinite?
Well, the lawmakers had to detach the concept of uniqueness from the physical medium. They recognized that a digital original is not a specific file located on a specific magnetic disk.
So how do they define it then?
Section 10 redefines an original through a two-pronged test. And this test is focused entirely on reliability and accessibility.
Okay, what's the first prong?
The first requirement is that there must exist a reliable assurance regarding the integrity of the document from the time it was first generated in its final form.
Okay, but integrity is a tricky word here. How does the law define it?
Very specifically, it means the information has remained complete and unaltered, apart from the addition of any endorsement or any change which arises in the normal course of communication, storage, and display.
Okay. So the law acknowledges the reality of network architecture.
Exactly. Because they know how the internet works.
Right. Like if I send you a PDF, my email client might append routing metadata to the header. The file might be broken into thousands of individual data packets.
Wired across different transatlantic cables.
And reassembled by your server on the other side of the world. The atomic structure of the file changes constantly during transmission.
But the law says that as long as the core content, the text of the contract, the numbers in the agreement remains completely unaltered, its integrity is preserved.
It separates the transport mechanism from the substantive content.
Right. And the standard for assessing that reliability is contextual.
Meaning what exactly?
The court will look at the purpose for which the information was generated and all relevant circumstances to determine if the integrity has been maintained.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the second prong of the test?
It's far more straightforward, but equally critical.
Yeah.
The document must be capable of being displayed to the person to whom it is to be presented.
Displayed. So if you claim the original contract is locked on a proprietary server, but the file format has degraded, or the decryption key is lost.
And the text cannot be read by a human being.
Right. It fails the test. It ceases to be an original under the law.
Exactly.
It's basically like presenting a sealed envelope to a judge and claiming it's a binding contract, but the envelope is made of solid titanium and literally cannot be opened.
That analogy holds perfectly. Treating an electronic document like physical paper is really about establishing a digital wax seal and an unbreakable envelope.
So as long as we can prove the wax seal wasn't tampered with, which is the integrity, and we can open the envelope and read the letter, which is the display.
It holds the exact same weight as a physical contract.
That is just brilliant drafting. But, a beautifully preserved contract is merely a piece of paper until somebody actually signs it.
Very true. The signature is the ultimate mechanism of commitment.
And sections 8, 9, and 11 tackle this incredibly complex problem of electronic signatures. Because in a digital environment, what even constitutes a valid signature?
Right. Is it typing your name at the bottom of an email?
Or is it pasting a scanned image of your handwritten signature into a Word document?
Well, let's look at Section 5, Paragraph D. The initial definition seems dangerously broad at first glance.
What does it say?
It states an electronic signature is any distinctive mark, characteristic, or sound in electronic form representing the identity of a person, attached to or logically associated with the electronic document.
Any mark.
Or any methodology or procedure employed with the intention of authenticating or approving the document.
Okay, that broad definition suggests that pasting a JPEG of my handwritten signature might actually qualify.
It does suggest that. But identity alone isn't enough to forge a binding commitment. The critical word in that definition is intention.
Intention.
Yes, a signature is not merely proof of identity. It is proof of intent to be legally bound by the contents of the document.
Ah, okay. So this is why Section 8 establishes stringent, specific requirements for an electronic signature to achieve full legal recognition.
Exactly. It is not enough to simply have a mark. The law demands proof that a prescribed procedure existed.
And this procedure must be robust, right? You must use a method to definitively identify the party and indicate that they had access to the electronic document to give their consent.
Right. The method must be reliable and appropriate for the purpose of the document. And crucially, it must be proven that this prescribed procedure was not alterable by the parties interested in the document.
Not alterable. That requirement right there fundamentally disqualifies a simple copied and pasted image for high-stakes transactions.
Absolutely it does. Because if I send you a Word document, you could easily copy the image of my signature from a previous letter and just paste it at the bottom of a new contract.
Because the procedure of pasting an image is highly alterable by an interested party.
Exactly. This legislative requirement catalyzed the development and adoption of secure, cryptographic digital signature platforms.
Like the ones we use all the time now. They track IP addresses, require multi-factor authentication, generate unique hash values for the document.
And they lock the file from further editing the exact moment the signature is applied. They provide the unalterable, independent procedure that the law demands.
So when those stringent procedures are followed, the law grants a powerful legal shield. Section 9 introduces the presumption of validity.
Yes, the presumption of validity is a huge deal in litigation.
It says in any legal proceeding, an electronic signature is presumed to be the signature of the person to whom it correlates, and is presumed that they have fixed it with the deliberate intention of signing.
So the court starts with the assumption that the digital signature is valid and authentic. This presumption flips the burden of proof, which is detailed in Section 11.
How does that burden shift work?
Well, the individual seeking to introduce the electronic document into a legal proceeding carries the initial burden of proving its authenticity.
Okay, so they have to produce evidence demonstrating the document is what they claim it to be, usually by showing the security logs of the signature platform, right?
Exactly. But once they establish that the prescribed procedure was used, the presumption locks in.
Ah, so if you want to argue that your digital signature was forged or that your computer was hacked, the burden is entirely on you to prove that the system failed.
Exactly. You have to prove it wasn't you.
Yeah.
But the law does build in an emergency release valve, thankfully.
Oh, really? What is it?
The presumption of validity applies unless the person relying on the signature knows of defects or unreliability, or if reliance on the signature is unreasonable under the circumstances.
Unreasonable under the circumstances. So, for example, if a bank receives a digital contract transferring the entirety of my life savings to an offshore shell corporation,
Right.
and the IP address executing the signature originates from a country I have never visited at 3 a.m.
Blindly relying on the presumption that signature borders on negligence. The law demands situational awareness.
It tempers strict technical rules with human common sense. I like that.
It does. But when a dispute does go to court, how do you practically prove the integrity of a complex information system to a judge?
Right. Do you have to bring in a team of computer scientists to deconstruct the server architecture in front of a jury?
That would take forever. So Section 14 introduces a pragmatic solution to streamline litigation. It allows matters of admissibility, presumption of integrity, and the reliability of the system to be established by an affidavit.
An affidavit.
Yes. A system administrator can simply submit a sworn statement attesting that, to the best of their knowledge, the servers were functioning normally, security protocols were active, and no breaches occurred.
Okay, an affidavit certainly speeds up the trial, but, I mean, it raises an immediate red flag regarding the rights of the accused.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. If I am being sued for breach of a digital contract, and the only evidence proving I clicked accept is a piece of paper signed by a faceless IT administrator swearing their servers are infallible.
You're fundamentally disadvantaged.
Right. I cannot interrogate a database. I cannot cross-examine a firewall to uncover a software glitch or a routing error.
And the architects of this law anticipated that exact constitutional dilemma.
Oh, they did.
Yes. Section 15 firmly anchors digital evidence back into the physical world of human accountability. It explicitly preserved the absolute right of cross-examination.
Okay, so how does that work if you can't cross-examine a computer?
The law states that the deponent of that affidavit, the IT administrator, can be cross-examined as a matter of right by the opposing party.
Okay.
Furthermore, any party has the right to cross-examine the specific individual who recorded or stored the electronic data message in the usual course of business.
So you cannot put a server on the witness stand, but you can absolutely subpoena the human being who configured the server.
Exactly. You can force them under oath to answer questions about their patch management, their security audit logs, and their access controls.
It acknowledges that digital systems are ultimately designed, maintained, and sometimes compromised by human beings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It always comes back to the humans.
Okay, so the contract is legally real. The signatures are verified. The integrity of the data is proven.
Right.
But in a physical transaction, the mechanics of a deal are constrained by geography and time. Two people sit in a room, they sign the paper, and the deal is done. The time and the place are indisputable.
But an electronic data message travels at the speed of light. It bounces through intermediaries across multiple time zones.
So establishing the exact when and where of a digital contract is a vital necessity for establishing jurisdiction and liability.
It is. And Chapter 3 and Part 3 of the Act define the physics of this digital communication.
Let's start with the concept of agency in an automated world, because Section 18 deals with the attribution of messages.
Right. We established earlier that an originator is the human or corporate entity the message purports to come from.
But Section 18 declares that a message is attributed to the originator even if it was sent by an information system programmed by them to operate automatically.
This is huge. This is the legal foundation for the deployment of bots and automated algorithms.
So the law refuses to allow automation to serve as a shield against liability.
Exactly. If a company deploys an algorithmic trading bot that executes a disastrous financial transaction,
Or an automated supply chain system that mistakenly orders 10,000 tons of raw steel instead of 1,000.
the company cannot claim they didn't personally authorize the message. They program the parameters of the automated system. Therefore, they inherit the attribution of every single action that system takes.
The machine acts as an extension of the originator's legal will. That's a powerful concept.
It really is. So with attribution settled, we have to confront the timeline. In the physical world, dropping a letter in a mailbox is obviously different from the recipient actually reading it.
Right, and in the digital world, an email can be sent, routed, delayed by a spam filter, and eventually delivered hours later.
So sections 21 and 22 create sharp demarcation lines for the time of dispatch and the time of receipt.
And the precision of these timelines can determine the success or failure of multi-million-dollar contracts, right?
Oh, absolutely. Section 21 states that, unless otherwise agreed, the dispatch of an electronic message occurs the exact moment it enters an information system outside the control of the originator.
The millisecond your message leaves your company's internal server and hits the public internet, it is legally dispatched.
You have relinquished control. Dispatch is the moment of release.
But receipt is far more complex because it depends entirely on the behavior of the addressee.
Yes. Section 22 bifurcates the rules of receipt based on whether a specific system was designated.
What do you mean by designated?
If a company publicly states, all official legal notices must be sent to legal@company.com, they have explicitly designated that information system.
Okay, so if I send an email to that specific address.
In that scenario, legal receipt occurs the absolute millisecond the message enters that designated server. It does not matter if the legal department is asleep or if they don't open the email client until Monday morning.
The message entered the designated boundary, and therefore it is legally received.
Right. The burden of monitoring a designated system falls entirely on the owner.
But what if I don't use that designated email? What if I find a personal email address of an executive on a networking site and send the contract there?
Then the standard changes drastically. If the originator sends the message to an information system that was not designated, receipt only occurs at the time when the electronic data message is actually retrieved by the addressee.
Oh, so if you circumvent the designated channel, you carry the burden of proving that the recipient actually opened and retrieved the file.
Exactly. That distinction protects individuals from being bound by contracts stealthily dropped into obscure or unmonitored digital inboxes.
Okay, so we have the when, now we must tackle the where. And this is where the legislation executes a truly mind-bending conceptual pivot.
Section 23, this is one of my favorite parts. It governs the place of dispatch and receipt.
Yeah, Section 23 introduces this legal fiction that honestly single-handedly prevented the collapse of the global economic tax structure.
It really did. It declares that an electronic document is deemed to be dispatched at the place where the originator has its principal place of business.
And received at the place where the addressee has its principal place of business.
Right. And the law explicitly dictates that this rule applies even if the originator or addressee utilized a laptop or other portable device to transmit or receive the message.
The physical location of the human being and the hardware at the exact moment of transmission is rendered entirely legally irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant.
So, for example, if the CEO of a company headquartered in Manila takes a vacation to a remote beach in Bali,
Right.
and they open their laptop and hit send to execute a massive corporate merger, the law forcefully pretends that the CEO is still sitting at their desk in Manila.
Yes, the transaction is anchored to the geographic location of the business entity, not the wandering location of the electronic impulse.
To understand why this legal fiction is an absolute necessity, you just have to look at the final sentence of Section 23.
What does it say?
It states, "This rule shall also apply to determine the tax situs of such transaction."
The tax situs. This is crucial. This is the jurisdiction where the transaction is legally located for the purpose of taxation.
Right. Because if the law determined jurisdiction based on the physical location of the laptop, or worse, the geographic location of the server that routed the email,
the result would be total regulatory anarchy. Corporations could evade domestic taxes simply by routing their internal communications through a server farm located in a tax haven.
or by having their executives literally step across a physical border before executing digital contracts on their phones.
It would spark a race to the bottom, hollowing out the tax base of entire nations based on nothing more than the manipulation of network routing protocols.
So by anchoring the digital cloud back to the physical principal place of business, the state asserts its sovereignty over the digital actions of its citizens and corporations.
It is a brilliant, necessary illusion. The law says, we do not care where your electrons traveled. We care where your business is physically incorporated.
But there is one specific sector of the economy where the speed of these electronic data messages requires an even more aggressive legal standard.
Oh, the banking industry. Section 16, paragraph 2.
Right. It dictates the exact moment an electronic banking transaction becomes immutable.
Because the banking system operates on trust and absolute chronological certainty. The law states that electronic transactions made through networking among banks are deemed legally consummated upon the actual dispensing of cash.
Or the debit of one account and the corresponding credit to another.
Exactly. It does not matter when the request was initiated or when the notification was received. The legal reality of the transaction is locked into existence, the exact millisecond. The numerical values in the bank's digital ledger are altered.
The law declares that the obligation arising from this debit and credit is absolute. It solidifies the digital ledger as the ultimate arbiter of financial reality.
It has to be, or the whole financial system unravels.
Okay, so we have digitized the flow of money, but the global economy still relies heavily on the physical movement of massive physical goods.
Right. Cargo ships hauling millions of shipping containers across oceans, they cannot be replaced by emails.
But the administration of that supply chain can be. Part 3 of the Act tackles electronic commerce in the carriage of goods.
And this is huge because the global shipping industry is notoriously bureaucratic. Historically, it relied on mountains of physical paperwork.
So Sections 25 and 26 seek to digitize the logistics matrix. Section 25 outlines all the actions involved in a contract of carriage.
Things like furnishing marks and weights, issuing receipts, claiming delivery, giving notice of loss or damage.
And most importantly, the issuance of a bill of lading.
The bill of lading is essential. It's basically a passport and a title deed for a shipping container.
Right. Historically, possession of that specific watermarked piece of paper represented absolute ownership of the physical goods floating in the middle of the ocean.
If you held the paper, you owned the cargo.
So Section 26 declares that any legal requirement for these actions to be carried out in writing is fully satisfied by the use of electronic data messages.
But digitizing a bill of lading introduces a catastrophic vulnerability. It's known as the double spend problem.
How does that work?
Well, if the paper document is replaced by a digital PDF, and that PDF represents ownership of $10 million worth of electronics.
What prevents a malicious actor from copying that PDF 100 times and selling the same shipping container to 100 different buyers?
Exactly. A physical piece of paper cannot be natively duplicated, but a digital file can be cloned flawlessly in a microsecond.
But the lawmakers saw this trap clearly. Section 26, paragraph 1b installs a massive technological caveat.
What is it?
It states that if a right or obligation must be conveyed by the transfer of a paper document, that transfer can only be executed electronically, provided that a reliable method is used to render such electronic data messages unique.
Unique. That word is everything. The requirement for uniqueness forces the industry to develop secure digital architectures.
You cannot just email a bill of lading.
No, you have to utilize centralized registries, trusted third-party verification systems.
Or, projecting forward to modern technology, distributed ledger systems like blockchain.
Exactly. The system must cryptographically ensure that only one authentic token representing the cargo exists at any given moment. And when that token is transferred, it leaves the originator's possession entirely.
The law basically demands that the digital system replicate the exclusive physical possession of a piece of paper.
It's an incredible piece of foresight.
So the private sector has been given all the tools. They can sign contracts, automate their supply chains, move money instantaneously, and enforce their digital property rights.
The corporate world is accelerating at light speed.
But a nation cannot fully digitize if its government remains trapped in the analog era.
That's the bottleneck.
Right. Because if a highly advanced tech startup still has to send an employee to wait in line for 6 hours at a government building to file paper tax returns or apply for a physical business permit,
The economic friction remains immense. Bureaucracies naturally resist rapid change. They are built on precedent and physical files.
So Part 4 of the Act represents the state turning the hammer of the law inward, forcing its own agencies to modernize.
This is honestly one of the most aggressive and ambitious mandates in the entire legislation. Section 27 acts as a legislative shock doctrine.
It places a strict, uncompromising countdown clock on the entire Philippine government ecosystem.
The timeline.
The law declares that, notwithstanding any existing law to the contrary, within exactly 2 years from the date of effectivity of this act, all departments, bureaus, offices, agencies, and government-owned corporations must adapt to the digital reality.
2 years. That is wild. 24 months to completely overhaul the operational mechanics of an entire national bureaucracy in the year 2000.
Many of these regional offices likely still relied on manual typewriters and massive rooms filled with physical filing cabinets. The logistical mountain they were ordered to climb is staggering.
But the mandate was unequivocal.
Right.
Within that 24-month window, any agency that requires the filing of documents, issues permits, or accepts payments is legally compelled to achieve 4 specific capabilities.
Okay, what were the 4?
First, they must accept the creation, filing, or retention of documents in electronic form. Second, they must be capable of issuing permits, licenses, or approvals electronically. Third, they must require or accept payments and issue receipts through digital channels. And fourth, they must transact official government business utilizing electronic data messages.
Wow. They were essentially ordered to replace the physical front doors of every government building with digital portals.
Yes, they were. But the law understood that you cannot simply command a bureaucracy to digitize without giving them the authority to write the operational manuals.
Right. So Section 27D authorizes these agencies to promulgate their own specific rules.
They were tasked with defining the exact file formats they would accept, the specific types of electronic signatures required for security, the control processes necessary to maintain confidentiality,
And the specific circumstances where paper documents would still be temporarily permitted during the transition.
However, a digital portal is entirely useless if the citizens cannot actually access it.
Right. You cannot mandate e-government without simultaneously building the infrastructure to support it.
And the government cannot rely entirely on the private sector to bridge the digital divide if it means rural or impoverished areas are left behind.
So Section 28 mandates the creation of the digital nervous system required to support this transformation. It's called RPWIB.
RPWE. The law directs the installation of an electronic online network designed to connect all government departments, agencies, and bureaus.
And crucially, this network was mandated to reach down to the regional and provincial levels.
It was also designed to connect state universities, public schools, and provide universal access to the general public.
But building a network is only half the battle. The cost of accessing that network determines who actually gets to participate in the digital economy.
Exactly. The lawmakers explicitly recognize that exorbitant internet costs act as a massive barrier to entry. It functionally excludes portions of the population from nation building.
So the act directed the Department of Transportation Communications, the National Telecommunications Commission, and the National Computer Center to aggressively cultivate a policy environment focused on the substantial reduction of access costs.
They specifically targeted the cost of leased lines, satellite links, dial-up connections, and the emerging broadband networks.
They were treating internet access not as a luxury commodity, but as a fundamental utility, as necessary for modern life as electricity or water.
And embedded within this infrastructure push is a mandate to establish a domestic internal exchange system.
Why was that necessary?
Because in the early architecture of the internet, routing was often highly inefficient. An email sent from a computer in Manila to another computer just a few miles away might be routed through a massive internet backbone server in California before being sent back across the Pacific.
That sounds terribly inefficient.
It was. This international routing was slow, consumed expensive bandwidth, and introduced unnecessary vulnerabilities.
So establishing a domestic internet exchange ensured that local traffic stayed local.
Yes, it allowed Philippine internet service providers to peer directly with one another, drastically increasing the speed, efficiency, and resilience of the nation's internal digital communications.
They were laying the virtual pipes and optimizing the flow.
Right, and with the infrastructure expanding and commerce moving online, the state needed a sheriff to patrol this new marketplace and protect consumers who are navigating these unfamiliar waters.
Section 29 delegates this authority to the Department of Trade and Industry, the DTI.
The DTI was given direct supervision over the promotion and development of electronic commerce.
Their mandate wasn't just to encourage business, it was to protect the public. They were empowered to establish quality standards, issue certifications, and even deploy an online public information and price monitoring system.
The objective was to cultivate trust. Consumers needed assurance that they wouldn't be endlessly defrauded in this new invisible marketplace.
So the digital city is now fully constructed. The private sector is building the storefronts, the government has built the roads and the portals, and the infrastructure is optimizing the flow of data.
But every city, no matter how well designed, eventually attracts bad actors.
Right. The criminals who once broke physical padlocks simply adapted their methodologies to break digital encryption.
So how does the law handle the reality of digital crime? And more importantly, who is held responsible when a crime occurs?
This brings us to Part V, Final Provisions, focusing on liability and penalties.
This is a huge topic. The most consequential legal debate regarding the architecture of the internet revolves around the concept of intermediary liability.
If someone uses a telecommunications network to transmit illegal material, whether that is a defamatory statement, a pirated movie, or a fraudulent scheme, Can the company that owns the network be sued or prosecuted for the crime?
Right. Section 30 addresses the extent of liability of a service provider, establishing a crucial legal shield known globally as a safe harbor provision.
This single provision is arguably the bedrock upon which the entire modern platform economy was built.
It absolutely is, because if an internet service provider or a platform hosting user-generated content was held strictly liable for every single piece of data flowing through their servers,
The legal risk would be insurmountable. They would be forced to monitor, review, and censor every single email, message, and upload in real time.
the internet as an open platform for communication would cease to exist overnight.
So the safe harbor provision protects the intermediaries, ensuring they are not subject to civil or criminal liability for the electronic data messages they merely provide access to.
The telecom companies are treated as neutral pipes. However, this immunity is not absolute. The law establishes 3 rigorous conditions that a service provider must continuously meet to maintain this protective shield.
The first condition is the absence of knowledge. The provider must not have actual knowledge or be aware of facts or circumstances from which it is apparent that the making, publication, dissemination, or distribution of the material is unlawful or infringes on rights.
If they are genuinely blind to the content, they are protected. But the moment they acquire actual knowledge of illegal activity and fail to act, the shield begins to fracture.
The second condition focuses on the financial mechanics of the operation. The service provider must not knowingly receive a financial benefit directly attributable to the unlawful or infringing activity.
This attempts to draw a line between a neutral infrastructure provider and a complicit enterprise.
Let's test the boundaries of that second condition, actually, because if a major internet service provider charges millions of customers a flat monthly subscription fee for web access,
Okay.
and a significant percentage of those customers use that access to illegally download copyrighted movies, the ISP is undeniably making massive amounts of money from users engaged in illegal activity.
That's true.
Doesn't the company financially benefit from maintaining those users? At what point does general corporate revenue become a financial benefit directly attributable to the crime?
That specific tension has been heavily litigated worldwide. The critical interpretation hinges on the phrase directly attributable. Courts generally distinguish between generalized revenue and specific monetization.
So a flat monthly fee for neutral internet access is generalized revenue. The ISP gets paid $20 whether the user reads Wikipedia or downloads pirated software.
Right. The revenue is not directly tied to the illicit act itself. However, imagine a platform specifically designed to host pirated media.
Okay.
And that platform charges users a specific fee to download a specific stolen movie or runs targeted advertisements directly alongside the infringing content.
In that scenario, the financial benefit is directly attributable to the specific unlawful activity.
Exactly. The law protects the passive infrastructure, but it strips the shield away from platforms engineered to profit from illegality.
It makes sense. The third condition requires that the service provider does not directly commit, induce, or cause another person to commit the unlawful act. They cannot encourage or facilitate the crime.
The service provider is protected only as long as they remain a genuinely neutral conduit. But what about the individuals actually committing the crimes?
Right. In the year 2000, the nature of digital crime was rapidly evolving. Section 33 establishes the penal provisions, laying down severe consequences for 2 primary categories of digital offenses.
The law recognized that digital crimes possess the potential to inflict massive, cascading economic damage far exceeding traditional physical theft.
The first category is hacking or cracking.
Right. The law defines this comprehensively as unauthorized access into or interference in a computer system or network.
It encompasses accessing a system to corrupt, alter, steal, or destroy data without the explicit consent of the owner. And it specifically highlights the introduction of computer viruses resulting in the corruption or loss of electronic data.
If an individual is found guilty of hacking, the penalties prescribed by Section 33 are incredibly steep.
It mandates a minimum fine of 100,000 pesos, with a maximum fine commensurate to the actual damage incurred. But the true deterrent is the loss of liberty.
The law mandates mandatory imprisonment ranging from 6 months to 3 years.
The inclusion of mandatory prison time was a stark warning. The state was declaring that deploying a malicious virus from the comfort of your bedroom carries the exact same grave consequences as physically breaking into a bank vault.
It's a huge shift. And the second major category of crime, addressed in Section 33, Paragraph B, deals with the massive, unauthorized distribution of intellectual property, piracy.
The definition of piracy is exhaustively detailed. It covers the unauthorized copying, reproduction, dissemination, distribution, importation, use, removal, alteration, substitution.
And it goes on and on.
Modification, storage, uploading, downloading, communication, making available to the public, or broadcasting of protected material, electronic signatures, or copyrighted works.
And they specifically include legally protected sound recordings. We have to remember the historical context of June 2000.
The world was watching the explosive rise of peer-to-peer file sharing.
Yes. The music industry was in total panic over the rampant downloading of MP3s. This law looked directly at that cultural phenomenon and laid down the hammer.
The penalty for digital piracy mirrors the penalty for hacking. A mandatory minimum fine of 100,000 pesos, a maximum fine tied to the extent of the damage, and mandatory imprisonment of 6 months to 3 years.
For any other violations of the Act not specifically covered by hacking or piracy, Section 33, Paragraph D establishes a maximum penalty of 1 million pesos or up to 6 years of imprisonment.
The message was unambiguous. The digital frontier was no longer a lawless Wild West. The architectural blueprint included a heavily fortified jailhouse. The state built an environment where digital actions trigger severe physical world consequences.
It's just a monumental piece of legislation.
We have explored a massive landscape today. We unpacked the profound scope of the Electronic Commerce Act of 2000.
We witnessed the state delegate the construction of the digital highway to the private sector while focusing its efforts on human capital.
We examine the philosophical shift required to redefine a computer, not by its hardware, but by its function.
We explored the complex legal alchemy that transforms a digital file into a legally binding original through the stringent requirements of integrity and accessibility.
We analyzed the rigorous, unalterable procedures demanded to forge a valid electronic signature and the rights of cross-examination that keep human beings accountable for the systems they build.
We tracked the precise physics of digital deals, the exact milliseconds of dispatch and receipt, and the brilliant legal fiction that anchors the digital tax base to a physical place of business.
We watched a government force its own sluggish bureaucracy into a rapid digital evolution, mandating the construction of portals and domestic internet exchanges.
And finally, we saw the state define the safe harbors that protect the builders of the internet while unleashing severe criminal penalties upon hackers and pirates.
Understanding this document is not an exercise in abstract legal history. This legislation is the active operating code of your daily life.
It really is. When you check out a digital shopping cart, when you send a legally binding email to a client, when your employer directly deposits your salary into your bank account, you are relying seamlessly on the systems constructed by this law.
This act manufactured the trust necessary for a digital economy to function. It ensures that your invisible digital actions possess physical, undeniable enforceability. It is the hidden foundation supporting the metropolis we all currently inhabit.
We live entirely inside the parameters set by this blueprint.
We do. But before we conclude this deep dive, there is a fascinating philosophical puzzle buried in the very final sections of this act, one that questions the ultimate authority of the law itself.
Oh, Section 38.
Yes. Section 38 contains a brief, almost innocuous sentence. It states, any provisions of this act may be varied by agreement between and among them, meaning the parties involved in a transaction.
Furthermore, Section 39 notes that the benefits of this act only apply to foreign parties whose countries grant reciprocal rights to citizens.
Here is the thought I want you to mull over. The state expended immense effort constructing this grand digital city, carefully balancing security, legal recognition, consumer protection, and corporate liability. They built the rules of the road to protect everyone.
But Section 38 casually admits that private parties can simply agree to vary, alter, or ignore these provisions through mutual consent.
Right. So if the foundational laws governing digital commerce, privacy, and liability can be opted out of by private agreement, who really holds the ultimate power in our digital economy today?
Is it the sovereign government that carefully drafts the overarching laws?
Or is it the massive multinational tech platforms whose 50-page terms and conditions documents we all blindly click accept on without reading effectively rewrite the rules of the city every single time we access their servers?
That is a very unsettling question.
We spent this entire time analyzing how the digital city was built, but perhaps the most vital question moving forward is not how the roads were paved, but who currently holds the power to change the speed limits.
Welcome to the debate. Imagine you wake up one morning, you pour yourself a cup of coffee, and check your bank account only to find it completely drained.
Oh, that's the absolute worst nightmare.
Right? And right next to that zero balance is a legally binding contract. It bears your verified signature, purchasing a piece of property halfway across the world that you have never even seen.
Which is terrifying, because when you take this to a judge, the law just looks at the digital signature and says, well, it's mathematically valid, you owe the money.
Exactly. It's a terrifying scenario, and it really strikes at the very heart that how commerce fundamentally changed at the turn of the millennium. I mean, we moved from a world where legal obligations were anchored in physical reality, ink, paper, wax seals, locked filing cabinets.
Right. To a landscape that is just entirely invisible.
Yes, invisible. Today, we are examining the blueprint that attempted to map that invisible world. That's Republic Act number 8792, the Philippine Electronic Commerce Act of 2000.
A massive piece of legislation.
Huge. And to really understand this law, we have to remember exactly what was happening in the Philippines in the year 2000. It is impossible to ignore the historical catalyst here.
Oh, you mean the I Love You virus?
Exactly. In May of that year, the I Love You computer virus originated in Manila. It infected, tens of millions of computers worldwide, causing billions of dollars in damages.
Yeah, it was unprecedented.
And because the country had no laws against malware at the time, the perpetrator essentially walked free. This act was passed mere weeks later.
Mere weeks. It was born out of absolute global urgency. And, that urgency forces us to ask our essential question for today. Does this act's framework, which grants sweeping legal equivalence to electronic documents while heavily shielding service providers from liability, does it adequately protect end users and the integrity of commerce?
Or on the flip side, does it create a system where accountability is just too easily evaded in the digital ether?
Precisely.
Well, I take the position that this act is a brilliantly pragmatic piece of legislation. I mean, it had to put out a fire and build a foundation simultaneously. By placing accountability squarely where it belongs, on the malicious actors and the originators of information, and crucially providing necessary safe harbors for the digital infrastructure, it really catalyzed a developing nation's leap into the information age.
And I take the opposing view. While transitioning to a digital economy was undeniably necessary, I argue that the law overcorrected.
Overcorrected?
Yeah. By offering broad immunities to intermediaries and relying on highly flexible, decentralized security agreements between private parties, the act prioritizes rapid technological expansion way over consumer protection. It basically creates an accountability vacuum.
Well, let's lay out the architecture of how this law actually functions, because I think the genius of the act is its complementary structure. First, you have Section 7, which establishes the concept of functional equivalence.
Right. Saying digital is the same as physical.
Exactly. It states that an electronic document has the exact same legal validity as physical paper, provided its integrity is maintained. But the legislature knew that simply saying digital is legal wasn't enough. They had to build the infrastructure to carry those documents.
The pipes.
The pipes, yes. So under Section 30, they created safe harbors. The law limits the civil and criminal liability of the service providers, so the telecommunications companies and internet platforms that route this information. They protected the pipes so the digital economy could actually flow.
I come at it from a completely different way. I mean, the necessity of building infrastructure does not justify creating a system where the entities controlling that infrastructure are absolved of responsibility. My primary concern lies in the dangerous intersection of those safe harbor provisions in Section 24, which handles the law's approach to security methods.
But you have to look at how accountability is still maintained in the Act. Section 30 ensures that private sector investment isn't stifled by the fear of systemic litigation. Sure, but it doesn't ignore bad behavior.
It just shifts the blame.
No, it outlines mandatory imprisonment and severe penalties in Section 33 for actual bad actors, the hackers, the crackers, the pirates. The legislation targets the malicious behavior, not the medium carrying it.
Let's look really closely at how that medium is protected, though. Under the safe harbor provisions, an intermediary, which, by the way, Section 5 defines incredibly broadly as anyone who sends, receives, stores, or provides services for an electronic document, they are only held liable if they have actual knowledge of unlawful facts.
Right, which makes sense.
But in practice, this creates what legal scholars call a see no evil incentive. Intermediaries are legally and financially encouraged to purposefully avoid monitoring their networks just to maintain their immunity. If they don't look for fraud or piracy, they don't have actual knowledge of it, and therefore they can't be sued.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. To understand why that protection is necessary, we have to look at the practical reality of how the internet actually works. We have to rely on the post office analogy here.
Oh, the classic post office defense.
It works for a reason. Just as we do not hold the physical postal service legally liable for the contents of a sealed letter sent by a criminal, we cannot hold an online service provider liable for the data packets moving through their servers. To do so would break the internet's basic functionality.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
The post office analogy is rhetorically effective, sure, but it completely breaks down when you look at the technical reality of modern service providers. A physical post office simply transports a sealed envelope from point A to point B.
Right.
But intermediaries in the digital space often provide the technical means to store and make documents accessible to third parties indefinitely. They function less like a mail carrier and much more like a massive public billboard company.
A billboard?
Yeah, if a billboard company puts up a defamatory or illegal poster, we absolutely expect them to take it down. But under this act, safe harbor, unless you can prove the corporate entity explicitly knew it was illegal at a specific microsecond, they are totally insulated.
But if we demand that they know everything on their servers, we break the system. Consider how data routing works. A telecommunications company routes millions of data packets every single second.
I understand the volume is high.
But wait, a single email is broken down into dozens of packets, scattered across different servers, and reassembled at the destination. To demand that an internet service provider crack open every single packet, reassemble it, inspect it for copyright infringement or, say, contractual fraud, and then send it along, that would completely halt the internet.
Nobody is asking them to open every packet.
The law specifically states the provider is protected only if they don't modify the content and don't receive a direct financial benefit from the unlawful activity. They are the roads, not the drivers.
Even if we accept them as roads, roads have patrol cars, and proving actual knowledge in a court of law is an incredibly high bar for a victim to clear. You have to prove what a vast, faceless corporate entity consciously knew. It essentially allows platforms to build the infrastructure that facilitates the harm, profit from the traffic, and then just shrug their shoulders when a user is defrauded.
The law does not leave the victim without recourse against the provider, though. There is a release valve in there.
Which is?
The Act explicitly preserves the civil liability of any party to the extent that it forms the basis for injunctive relief.
Ah, an injunction.
Right. Meaning a court can still order the service provider to remove, block, or deny access to the malicious material. They aren't untouchable. They are just protected from being sued into oblivion for the initial passive transit of the data.
And logically, if the post office isn't liable for the forged check in the mail, then liability must fall on the person who sent it. Which brings us to a much more dangerous territory for the average person, the originator of the message. If the intermediary is shielded, the burden just shifts entirely to the end user. And this is where the Act's rules on electronic attribution, specifically sections 18 and 19, become deeply concerning.
How so?
Well, Section 18 states that an addressee, the person receiving the document, is entitled to assume a document comes from the originator if the message resulted from someone who gained access to the originator's method of identification.
Meaning, if an electronic key or a digital signature belonging to you is used to sign a contract, the receiving party has the legal right to assume you were the one who signed it.
Exactly. Now, let's explain what an electronic key actually is in this context. We aren't talking about a physical USB drive you carry in your pocket.
No, of course not.
We are talking about cryptographic secrets, strings of data used to secure sensitive information. If a user's electronic key is stolen, perhaps through absolutely no fault of their own, maybe due to a sophisticated phishing attack or a massive third-party data breach at their password manager. The legal burden initially falls on the victim.
That's a strong claim.
It's what the law says. The act empowers the receiving party, say a massive financial institution, to enforce a potentially ruinous contract against the victim simply because their digital identity was compromised. It places a terrifying burden of absolute, infallible security on the average citizen.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective. You are looking at the rule of attribution in a vacuum. The act does not abandon the victim to the wolves. It builds in an immediate, mandatory failsafe in Section 18, Paragraph 4, and Section 19.
The reasonable care clause?
Exactly. The assumption of attribution instantly dissolves the moment the addressee knew, or should have known, had they exercised reasonable care, that the message was not actually from the originator.
But how does reasonable care apply to automated information systems? Let's go back to your opening scenario with the drained bank account.
Okay.
If a bank server automatically processes a transaction using a stolen electronic key, the server isn't a human bank teller. It doesn't have human intuition. It doesn't look at the customer and say, you look nervous today.
No, it doesn't.
It just mathematically verifies the cryptographic signature and processes the code. Expecting a machine to exercise reasonable care when presented with a mathematically valid, albeit stolen key is a paradox.
Which is precisely why the legislature specifically addressed automated systems in the text. They understood that machines process these transactions. The law legally enforces a standard of mutual vigilance. If an originator realizes their key is compromised, they give notice and the addressee must halt.
Assuming they realize it in time?
But more importantly, if the addressee's automated system receives a request that is wildly out of character, say a sudden transfer of all funds to a foreign IP address at 3 a.m., that system cannot blindly rely on the attribution just because the math checks out. The Act forces both the sender and the receiver to build robust, logically sound systems that look for anomalies. It doesn't punish the victim, it forces the entire economic ecosystem to elevate its security posture.
I would argue it creates a chaotic scenario where both parties are simply pointing fingers at each other. The victim claims the bank failed to exercise reasonable care by ignoring red flags, and the bank claims the victim failed to secure their electronic key.
Which is what the courts are for.
Right, and if both the sender and the provider are pointing fingers, how does this actually get resolved in a courtroom? This leads us directly to the evidentiary weight of these digital documents. And frankly, Sections 11 and 24 establish what I can only describe as a wild west of security standards.
Ah, you're referring to the flexibility the Act provides in choosing security methods.
Yes, flexibility. The law explicitly states in Section 11 that an electronic signature can be authenticated merely by a letter, character, number, or other symbol in electronic form logically associated with the document. A symbol.
It's functional equivalence.
But furthermore, Section 24 dictates that transacting parties are completely free to determine the type and level of security they need and to select literally any technological methods that suit their purposes. Combine these two, and you open the door to chaotic legal proceedings.
How is it chaotic if both parties agreed to it?
Because courts are forced to decipher highly subjective ad hoc security agreements rather than relying on standardized, state-mandated encryptions. If I argue that my official legally binding signature is just the number 7 typed at the bottom of an email, and you agreed to that in our initial contract, we are now wasting a judge's time debating the cryptographic integrity of the number 7.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because this flexibility is the single greatest feature of the legislation. It is absolutely not a bug. You have to view this through the lens of technological evolution.
I am.
The Act was passed in the year 2000. If the legislature had mandated a specific rigid encryption standard, say a specific 64-bit encryption protocol that was considered cutting edge at the time, it would be laughably obsolete today. Worse, it would be dangerous. It could be easily cracked by a modern smartphone in seconds. Technology evolves exponentially faster than the legislative process. By remaining strictly technology neutral, the Act future-proofed itself.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the enormous burden it places on the judiciary?
The judges?
Yes. By refusing to set a baseline standard, the Act shifts the entire burden of technological evaluation onto judges who are legal scholars, not cryptography experts. The law dictates that in assessing the evidential weight of a digital document, the reliability of how it was generated, stored, and communicated must be given due regard.
As it should be.
But that turns every single breach of contract dispute into a highly technical forensic computer science seminar. Without mandated secure logging or immutable ledgers, proving a document is unaltered relies heavily on the very systems that could have been manipulated in the first place.
But the burden of proof solves that problem. Section 11 clearly states that the person seeking to introduce an electronic document in a legal proceeding has the burden of proving its authenticity. It inherently protects the skeptical party.
In theory.
No, in practice. Let's take your example. If you bring a document to court with the number 7 as a signature, the burden is entirely on you to prove that this 7 is procedurally reliable. You have to bring in the metadata, the IP logs, the timestamps, and demonstrate the chain of custody. If you can't logically prove the integrity of that 7, the judge just throws it out.
And I still maintain that relying on the usual and ordinary course of business to prove digital integrity is essentially relying on the honor system in an environment that is inherently vulnerable to imperceptible alteration. A physical forgery leaves microscopic indentations on the paper. A digital forgery executed perfectly leaves absolutely no trace.
Well, that assumes digital forensics hasn't evolved alongside the fraud, which it has. The Act basically translates centuries-old legal principles, witness testimony, business records exceptions, cross-examination, and applies them to optical and magnetic impulses. But to truly understand why the legislature refused to mandate strict security baselines, you really have to look at the government's own mandate within the Act, the creation of RP Web.
Section 28, the initiative to connect all government departments?
Exactly. RP Web was a massive mandate to install a unified electronic online network across all government departments, down to the regional and provincial levels, within 2 years. In the year 2000, we are talking about an archipelago of over 7,000 islands.
It was ambitious, I'll give it that.
You had modern financial districts in Manila, sure, but you also had rural municipal offices running on dial-up connections, if they even had internet at all. To achieve that massive infrastructure goal across wildly diverse geographic and economic realities, rigid security mandates would have bottlenecked the entire process.
So they sacrificed security for speed.
They prioritized functionality. A remote provincial office couldn't implement complex public key infrastructure, but they could use basic, mutually agreed upon passwords to transmit a memo. The flexibility allowed the digital economy to actually get off the ground, rather than being paralyzed by regulatory perfectionism.
I understand the desire to avoid regulatory paralysis. A law that cannot be implemented is pretty much useless. However, there is a profound difference between technology neutrality and a complete abdication of baseline standards. In their rush to connect those 7,000 islands and protect the telecommunication companies laying the cables, they created a reality where the intermediary holds all the technical power.
While the originator holds the responsibility.
Exactly. The originator bears the terrifying initial risk of attribution, and the courts are just left to sort through bespoke subjective security agreements.
Well, I think we have mapped the boundaries of this disagreement quite thoroughly today. As we look to summarize our discussion, my position firmly remains that Republic Act 8792 is an elegantly constructed, highly effective framework. It didn't try to predict the technology of tomorrow. It created a flexible container capable of holding whatever technology came next. By utilizing concepts like functional equivalence and by providing absolutely vital safe harbors for the intermediaries routing our data, it successfully created the legal bedrock necessary to build a modern digital economy and a modernized government.
And I maintain that while its technology-neutral stance was definitely born of historical necessity, catalyzed by global events like that I Love You virus, the framework's heavy reliance on party-determined security standards, coupled with blanket intermediary immunity, it just creates a fragile ecosystem.
You still see it as an accountability vacuum.
I do. It builds a system where accountability can too easily slip through the cracks of the digital infrastructure. It leaves the end user highly vulnerable to the complexities of proving digital integrity in a system that was designed primarily to protect the providers.
Yet, despite our differing perspectives on where the balance of liability should ultimately lie, I believe we converge on one profound truth regarding this act. It radically and permanently shifted the burden of diligence.
Oh, it absolutely did. Moving from the physical realm of paper and ink to the invisible realm of cryptography, it fundamentally changes what it means to verify identity and intent. It requires an entirely new level of literacy, a digital literacy, from every citizen, every corporation, and every judge.
Right.
You can no longer rely on the physical properties of a document. You must understand the logical properties of its generation. The physical filing cabinet is truly gone.
The invisible architecture has fully replaced the visible one. And, there is so much more to this invisible architecture that we haven't even touched upon today. For those listening, I highly encourage you to explore the source material further, particularly Part 3 of the Act, which deals with the carriage of goods.
Yes, that is a fascinating area to look into. When you take these concepts of electronic data messages, the digital signatures, the safe harbors, the attribution rules, and you apply them to international trade, it opens up a whole new world.
It really does.
Imagine trying to transfer the legal rights to millions of dollars of physical goods sitting in a shipping container halfway across the ocean and relying entirely on a digital manifest. It raises incredible questions about global jurisdiction and commerce.
It truly does. We leave you to form your own conclusions on where the balance of accountability should lie in our digital world. But the next time you casually click "I agree" or digitally sign a document on your phone, remember that you aren't just sending a message. You are interacting with a complex legal mechanism designed to replace the unyielding certainty of ink and paper. The obligations you create are floating out there, invisible but just as binding. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.